Good morning. We don't have too much attrition from last night's revelries. I'm always happy to see people return to a second day of a conference. My name's David Gallagher, and I am a senior partner and CEO for Ketchum in Europe. And I need to apologize to my boss because I think at some point in the program it implies that I'm the global CEO, and I'm not. So if Rob Flaherty is back there somewhere, I apologize for that. And for the next 22 hours, I will be your president of ICCO. Not that I'm counting the hours down, but I will pass the baton on at our board meeting on Saturday. And for this morning, I will be ushering speakers on and off the stage, starting with Arun Sudhaman, who literally needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him a brief one anyway. Arun is a partner and editor-in-chief for the Holmes Report, the principal architect and author for the Global Report, which is always a highlight of this meeting and indeed the ICCO year, because it's one of the few independent assessments we have of the state of the global PR industry. And it's based on feedback that you've given through your agencies and through your associations and indeed through the independent analysis and review of Arun and his colleagues at the Holmes Report. Arun is, without a doubt, the most knowledgeable journalist covering our industry on a global stage. And I hope you don't mind me embarrassing you to say that. This is because he's very informed. He knows our businesses better than we know them ourselves. He comes to meetings like this all over the world. He meets with us in our offices. He hangs out in bars and gets me to say things that I can't believe I've just said, sometimes for the record. And it's a real privilege to have him talk us through the findings. These have been released earlier, but this is the first time we've had a chance as a group to talk about what they mean and what it might suggest for the future of the industry. So please show your appreciation for Arun Sudhaman.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Wow. That's quite an introduction. Thank you, David. But I can't promise that what you told me last night will remain off the record, I'm afraid. So anyway, thank you all. It's so good to see so many of you in the room this morning. I'm always amazed at the endurance levels of this industry. I sometimes feel like we should be researching that. But instead, we actually research the size and shape of the global PR industry. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about this morning, the World PR Report. Our Twitter handles, if you would be so kind as to tweet. I know David in particular is quite the maven on Twitter these days. So a little bit about the World PR Report. We launched it 5 years ago. We felt that there was a dearth, frankly, of credible independent analysis of the size and shape of the global PR agency industry. And in particular, we wanted to be able to estimate the size of the global PR agency industry. We wanted to be able to track how it was growing, and we wanted to be able to deliver insight and intelligence around the trends, opportunities, and challenges facing PR firms all over the world. Now, the big challenge, of course, with this kind of a report, as many of you in the room will probably be aware, is an American law called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And I know Julia, for example, in the hood Julia in the audience has written about this quite eloquently before. Many American PR firms, listed PR firms, choose not to report their numbers because of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And it's an obstacle to compiling a report of this nature. Luckily, many American PR firms are willing to give us an indication of their numbers, and we're able to correlate that with other sources of information to come up with, I think, a fairly accurate picture of the size of the biggest agencies in the world. We get around 450 to 500 submissions from PR firms around the world every year for the World PR Report. That helps us to come up with a ranking of the top 250 PR firms in the world. I won't go through all of that this morning. It's in the report that I think you all have. We also get submissions from the 31 ICCO member organizations, which represent thousands and thousands of PR firms around the world. And all of that helps us put together a picture of the global PR agency industry. In addition to the ranking, we're able to deliver insight and intelligence around the big drivers of growth, the opportunities that the PR agency industry can capitalize on, and in particular, the challenges. The research takes place from February to April. It is, as I said, the 5th edition of the report, and it was conducted this year by an American company called Nulio Labs. So I wanted to first just run through some of the headline findings, and then at some point, hopefully soon, I'm going to bring David in to provide his perspective. And then before we get too long into this, I really want to open this up to the floor and get your views. And in particular, we're going to look at some of the big challenges that the report identifies. And I'd really like to hear your views, your comments, and your questions on these challenges, because I feel that's going to be a lot more instructive than me or indeed David just talking through some of the findings. So the first headline figure we have is that the global PR agency industry grew 7%, remember this is based on 2014 numbers, to 13.5 billion. Now, it's important to bear in mind with this kind of a number that that is actually a sort of minimum. 13.5 billion, we estimate, is what the global PR agency industry is worth at least. And the reason for that, of course, is that this is a very long-tail industry. There are so many small PR firms around the world that don't report their numbers. But we are confident saying that it's worth at least 13.5 billion. The other thing to note here is that this refers to agencies only. We find that once you start factoring in-house spend and government PR departments, it becomes very difficult, in fact, especially in emerging markets around the world. So the interesting thing we look at as well is how different types of firms are growing. And what we find is that since the recession hit, in fact, independent PR firms, so I think many of you, in fact, in this room, are growing at a much higher rate than publicly owned PR firms. And that's something that's been in place since around 2009. And in fact, that disparity is getting bigger. So at this point, I'd like David to be the spokesperson for all publicly owned PR firms around the world. And tell us, David, what's going wrong?
I did expect you to ask me that. But I actually kind of look at this from a wider industry perspective. One great privilege of being involved with ICCO, as I have been for a few years, is really getting to see what's happening from an independent perspective, as well as from my own experience in a publicly listed firm. And I do see good news on both of these figures. From an independent perspective, this to me suggests that it's a great time to work for an independent agency. You're obviously showing some agility in the market. You're moving towards opportunities, and I believe that some of that growth reflects bringing new clients into the industry, into the market. So you're actually growing the pool and creating opportunities for your competitors, and in some cases maybe even for the listed firms. The fact that growth is slowing in the listed firms, to me, is not a negative. I know in our group and when in conversations in the other groups, we're all chasing profitable growth. And I think that's good for the industry as well. So we're actually walking away from some revenue opportunities if it doesn't meet our profit targets, or if it doesn't seem sustainable, or if it doesn't seem like it's the kind of business that we can maintain for a while. And I think that's good for the industry too, because I think that brings in more sophisticated buyers and kind of creates a more buoyant, more durable market. So I actually like to see the big networks growing, and I wouldn't mind us growing at a slightly better pace. But the fact that we are growing and that we're maintaining high profits, I think is good. And I like to see the independents growing the overall market at the pace that they are.
Okay, good, thank you. I think it's also worth noting that many of the publicly owned PR firms are big, and they're across multiple markets. So sometimes growth can be a little difficult when you're faced with, as some have been, 11 different types of recession in Europe for the last 2 or 3 years or so. And the other thing to bear in mind is, whilst the global PR agency industry did grow 7% in 2014, that was down slightly on the year before. I think it was 11% the year before, and I think it was 11% the year before that. That it should not be, I don't really think it should be taken as an indication that growth is slowing. Instead, what we've seen is currency volatility is having an impact. We do this research in US dollars, and because of the fluctuation in the value of the dollar, agencies that report in pounds or euros end up with lower growth than they would do.
If I could just comment on that too, and I'm glad I didn't want to sound defensive on that, but all the businesses that I manage report in a currency other than the dollar. And these last 2 years have been hard. The dollars are expensive, and that's just how it reflects. Yeah. On the other hand, when the dollar's been down, we've also benefited from that as well. So I think in the long haul, it evens out, but that's definitely a factor in the last year.
Yeah, sure. And this year, for the first time, as you'll see in the report, we did some constant currency tracking on specific markets. And when we did that, we found that in the UK, for example, growth was at double digits. And even in the Eurozone, I think growth was higher than you might expect. Okay, so just talk very quickly about the three main opportunities identified for the global PR agency industry, according to all of you and everyone that took part in the report. The first is that marketers are increasing their PR budgets. I think this is a really big opportunity for the PR industry. I can't imagine this is a big surprise to many of you in the room. We're not really seeing, frankly, existing communications budgets increasing. Instead, what we're seeing as a source of growth is that the marketing side of organizations is increasing their spend on PR firms. And so I would suggest to you that if you're not already trying to access those marketing budgets, that you do try and access those marketing budgets, because I think it's becoming a really important source of growth for PR agencies. The second one, again, I can't imagine will be a surprise to anyone in this room. Digital and technology is driving growth, both in terms of the type of work being done and also some of the new types of companies coming onto the market. And the third one actually should bring a smile perhaps to some of the people in this room. Measurement and analytics, which frankly has not been an area that agencies had been spending a lot of money on, has really grown in the last year and has surged, frankly, as an investment priority. David, perhaps you'd like to offer your insight here into why that's happening. Is this something that's being driven by clients?
I think so. You know, I made a joke to you earlier when we were looking at this, and I was thinking about it. I thought maybe there's some truth to it. I think when we stopped calling it evaluation and started calling it analytics, there was a shift in the perception, both in the client marketplace and within agencies. I think the other thing is that we can now analyze better than we could before. So the services we're able to offer, I think, have more validity and more appeal to the market. So now in our group, it's definitely an investment. When I talk to our competitors, it's probably the single biggest area that we're making investments, either through our own new technologies or through acquisitions. Mm.
Yeah, I think it's a really good sign. And frankly, I'll admit I was surprised to see it had grown so much as an investment priority. But that bodes well for the future of the industry for obvious reasons. Now, what I'd really like to focus the rest of this session on is this particular question. We ask people about the greatest challenge that they feel they're facing in their market. Since the recession hit, every year it has been, if you can't read the type, it's a little small. Every year it has been general economic conditions until this year, when it was overtaken by concerns about staff recruitment, which I think says two things. One, that economic concerns have eased, which is great news. But two, that talent is becoming much more of an issue, perhaps. And if we drill down a little bit into that, we find that talent, as I've said, emerges as the biggest challenge, overtaking economic conditions. And when we ask people why and what are the specific challenges they're facing when it comes to talent, it is finding people from non-traditional backgrounds, something that we discussed at length yesterday, and I suspect will come up again today. And what I'd like to do now maybe is I'll ask David for your view on this, and then if we can open up to the floor as well to just get some views from all of you and maybe some questions as well. Because this is a concern, David, but should it be a concern or should it be seen as an opportunity?
Well, both. I had kind of three reactions to this. One, just generally, I think it's just a general economic cycle. So when the job market is tight, people stay put, and there's just not as much movement. So it's probably a reflection of people's confidence in economic outlooks that there's more movement back and forth. And now we're able to talk about talent questions rather than macroeconomic questions. I think the challenge of hiring people from non-traditional PR backgrounds is probably our biggest issue as an industry right now. I mean, generally we're pretty crap at hiring people who don't come through our systems. As much as we talk about hiring people, especially from a digital or social background, we're really not very good at accommodating a different skill set and a different type of employee. I thought Andreas yesterday from Fisher Apple had some great insights about not treating your digital talent the way you treat your kind of traditional talent, and I think that's something we have to be much more agile about. And the biggest question to me in talent, and I was speaking briefly to Alice last night about this, is not really how we attract new talent in. I mean, frankly, we get lots of great superstars coming in at junior levels and mid levels, but it's how do we make the best use of our more mature talent. These are the people who are most expensive on our payrolls, and with the model shifting underneath them, they're finding a hard time adding value back to their clients and to the agency. So to me, the thing we've really got to work with is how do we make best use of people who've been with us for 10 or 15 years and make sure that they're fulfilled, but they're also adding value back to the agency and back to their clients.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's not just finding people from non-traditional backgrounds, but actually managing that transition for people within the agency. Yep. Okay, so maybe if we open up to the floor at this point, because I'd love to hear your views on this, and if I could start by asking, maybe just to start with a show of hands, how many of you in this room within the past year have hired someone from, let's say, a non-traditional background for your agency? Okay, I think that's around half, maybe, or less. How many of you plan to within the next year or two? Okay, it's a lot more. I'd love to hear a comment from someone in the crowd as to what is stopping you and what's the challenge you're finding in terms of hiring someone from a non-traditional background. So if anyone would be brave enough, please.
Well, yeah, non-traditional people doesn't like to work for PR industry.
Okay.
It's really hard to convince them to work for us.
Well, and if you don't mind me asking, what is there a specific concern they have about the PR industry?
Well, probably they don't know industry well. That's what I can say at least.
Okay. Okay. Wow, we've got so many now. This is good. Does anyone want to respond to that first? Maybe with an idea in terms of how the industry could be either educating people or positioning itself in a way that it can attract non-traditional talent who have this concern?
So what we've partly done is position ourselves as a communications consultancy and not as a PR firm. But what we find when we get either digital or tech experts that they don't have a client orientation when they come into the agency. So they struggle, they come up with great ideas, but they quite often struggle to sell the ideas to clients, which makes it difficult for the rest of their team members.
Okay. So not only attracting them, but once they're in, it's difficult to incorporate them within the model? Or, okay, interesting. Any responses to that? Or indeed, David, did you have anything to add?
Well, I think you put your finger on it. What I find is that I hate using the word traditional, but I don't have a better phrase. People who are our usual suspects working for an agency generally come into this business because they like working with people. That's how they came into it. Maybe they like the way they write. Maybe they like the idea of creating images and ideas. But generally, they like working with people. People we bring in on the digital or tech side like the technology, and they like the apps, and they like the latest social platforms. They're not always as interested in the people. So if you can find the people who understand the technology and enjoy working with the people, the clients, you've found kind of the perfect new hire. But they're in a Venn diagram. They're somewhat separated now in general.
I think we had Renee?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think the comment from our colleague up front there about positioning ourselves more as a communications consultancy, I think is a good way to go. I think the other thing that's interesting is that when folks from non-traditional backgrounds come into an agency, perhaps PR agencies are not necessarily designed the same way some other communications agencies are. So if we look at perhaps different types of titles, different sort of infrastructure, the way that we actually design the firms now for the future should be very different than the way that it's looked in the past or even the way that it looks today. Because when these new types of talent come into the firm, they need to be able to feel comfortable and like it's a place that they could make a home. And so if it's so drastically different, I think you have a harder time of retaining them.
Before we get, I wanted to ask a question at that point. So, are the issues that agencies face in this regard, are they more cultural or are they more operational? So is it a question of making people just feel more comfortable and loved, or is there actually an issue with the way that PR firms are modeled? You know, the retainer model, for example, is popular in the public relations industry, but when we look at digital agencies, they tend to run much more on a project basis. So I'd be interested to hear views on that. Yep.
I agree with everything that's been said. On the operational front, I think we need to pay our people better, and I think we need to revisit compensation for the non-traditional folks. But also on the cultural front, I think that as an industry overall, we lack swagger. Our competitors have lots of swagger, ample doses of it. I'm not saying we need to have it to the point of hubris, but I do think PR needs PR, which I think is something that's been talked about quite often, will be talked about a bit more.
I just wanted to respond on the point that David was making about actually getting senior people paying their way, really, because when you ask about what gets in the way of making that investment is actually what time frame you're going to get a return on that investment is probably the thing that stilts my decision process, because actually picking up on the lady's point earlier, it's actually quite hard to find people with the title of head of digital that understand our practice capability in terms of how they make digital work for our campaigns and how to actually build a campaign with digital. They understand the nuts and bolts, but actually the creative and building the creative and all the routes out of that is the area where they don't have the same level of awareness. So they're quite hard to get contributing and selling and paying for themselves, even though they've got a huge amount of value to add. There's not that baseline. It's a big investment to get them up to speed.
Right. Nitin?
I think all concerns are valid, what people have just said. What we've done in India is we've actually tied up with another institution and started an accelerated training course for people from non-traditional backgrounds. So it literally crunches the time to, one, understand how an agency or a consultancy functions, what are the kind of the key basics of public relations, digital, etc. So it kind of gets that learning curve up really, really quickly and gets them to merge much quicker than otherwise.
So a role for training as well. I wanted to hand back to you at this point, David, just to ask you, do you feel that there's enough training done of people coming into your agency if they come from a non-traditional background, or is it more sink or swim?
I would like to think that there's sufficient training, but if I look at the numbers, our digital hires don't last as long as our other hires. Now, I think that's partly because there's a high demand for them in the market, so they've just got more opportunities. But I have to take some blame for that as well. I don't think we always create the right operational environment or the right cultural environment to accommodate new skills. There was a suggestion yesterday that if you want to hire a crack digital team, maybe you let them work in the evenings. They come in at noon and leave at 10. I don't know if that's the right way to do it or not, but I think we're all pretty stuck in old ways of operating, and we talk about new ways of performing, and they're not always lined up.
Okay. I want to move on to the last slide we've got at this point, actually, because I think this is a really interesting one as well. Sorry, the last two slides, in fact. These are the types of skills, obviously, that PR agencies are now are saying are going to be more relevant over the next decade. Social media community management is extremely important. Multimedia content creation, insight and planning, creativity, and then slightly below that, measurement and analytics, digital build and production. So these are the things that people are telling us that they're going to be recruiting for over the next decade. But, the last slide's gone. Oh well. I was going to show you a slide which said, when we ask people where they are hiring from, 65% said that they are looking to source talent from rival PR agencies. So that seems to suggest something of a dichotomy to me when you're looking to hire all of these types of skills which are maybe not so traditional in terms of existing PR agencies. And yet the people you're looking to hire from are other PR agencies. And I wondered if anyone can maybe offer an explanation into why that's the case. David, I'll start with you.
Well, I think they plug and play faster. So I think we all have aspirations to hire for attitude and then try to inspire them. But we end up hiring for skills. And it's much easier if you have a very valuable account executive or account manager who's left. You've got a client who wants to know what the solution is. You have no extra capacity to fill it internally. You go out and hire somebody who looks a lot like her or him from another agency, and it's a faster solution. So I think we've got to get past the short-term horizons and try to have a longer look at the talent we're developing. And we're always going to have to make some of these decisions, but I think if we could stretch out the horizons, we could make more strategic decisions in who we hire.
Interested again in any views from the floor on this. I mean, how many of you, for example, feel that the talent you need to hire over the next year is actually going to come from another PR agency? Okay, 2 people. 3. But no, I mean, it's interesting that so many of you don't think that, and yet when we ask this question anonymously, 2/3 of you are saying that at least at the moment you're hiring predominantly from other agencies. Was there a question there? Oh, sorry, there's one here.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, for us, not more than 30% of our hires come from other agencies. And I do agree that what David is saying is that, when you are in a rush, it's easier to hire an executive from, with a ready skill set, sort of a faster plug and play. But in our experience, people coming from non-PR agency backgrounds, they tend to actually last longer. It takes more time to get them up to speed, but they bring more value in the longer run because they have sometimes completely different skill set, and they are not biased in terms of, because many of the PR managers, PR executives that come from agency, they also jump from agency to agency. And so they spend 3 years with us, 2 years somewhere else, 5 years somewhere else. And I've noticed that people who are initially not coming from PR agencies background, they actually tend to stay longer because they don't have this paradigm of jumping to another agency in 3 years because they offer $100 more. So if you can wait a little, and if you can invest some time and money into training these people, and sort of this kind of learning curve is longer, it pays off in my experience.
So a bit more patience, maybe, is required. What about this issue around every person has to sell and be billable? I mean, is that just non-negotiable for PR agencies? No? Yep, please. Mm-hmm.
Unless the PR model changes in terms of its billing significantly, we struggle as a business with so much downtime. We're trying to sell out senior people with fluctuation of budgets and work to actually create the level of billing that we want to, just to cover margin to the level that we would all hope to. And the notion of having additional resource that is there not billable is, I think, a tough one to swallow from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think everybody's got to add direct value. How you account for that probably varies by firm, but I think that everybody has to have some direct accountability. This kind of follows on some of the more general comments, but maybe it's a plea to the leaders here in this room. Aaron Quitkin and I, you met him yesterday. We started off early in our careers working for a small agency in Washington, and one of the things our boss told us then, and one of the things he complained about, was that kids don't read the newspaper today. How can they know what's going on in the world? They've got to get up and read the newspaper. This was back in the 90s, but he was right. We weren't reading the newspaper, and we tried to get better about that. Now what the kids are saying is that their bosses aren't on social media. They're not on Twitter. They're not really active. They're not really walking the talk. So you've got to meet your talent halfway and deal with them on the platforms that they're dealing with to be credible.
Sorry, Yomi?
Thank you. My experience has been that a lot of us that are in public relations, we are from the liberal arts background. And when we have hired from non-traditional PR backgrounds, we've hired people from the sciences, from engineering, from accountancy. And somehow or the other, I've noticed that because they must have a conclusion, that usually when they make a presentation or a pitch, it's stronger because they're always looking for a cogent reason. They are science-driven. So every time you add 2 molecules of hydrogen with 1 molecule of oxygen, it must become H2O. So while we in the liberal arts, what's good for you may not be good for the next person. So I tend to find that those who are in the sciences, in our business, they do a lot better in driving the business than those of us who are in the liberal arts. I don't know if any other person shares in that experience. We had somebody from engineering, he had a master's in engineering, and he was excellent in putting strategy documents together. Thank you.
That's a really good point, I think. And we're starting to see, I think, many more people from the sciences entering the industry. Before we close, one more question I wanted to ask. Someone from the floor actually said, we are selling time and we are selling people. But are we still? I mean, is time the number one thing that PR agencies are going to sell or should be selling? Given the world we live in now where, maybe we're selling products, maybe we're selling, who knows, one day intellectual property. But is that an issue as well? Do any of you in the audience feel like, or maybe you're already doing this, that you're not selling time, you're selling other deliverables rather than time? Nicola?
So we traditionally had all our clients on retainer, and we found that the margins came under pressure. So what we then started doing, we sold campaigns on top of that. We came up with a creative idea proactively and sold that to the client. Then we developed an influencer product that we sell separately. And now we've developed an analysis measurement product that we're also selling separately. And then, of course, we've got an infographic and design team, and that's also separately. So that apart from the annuity income, you've got products that you can go on and sell to your clients, and I think that's where the potential lies.
Interesting. Just before we close, how many of you in the room still primarily, well, no, let's flip this. How many of you in the room are selling something other than time right now? Oh, it's quite a lot.
If I could
That's more than half, sorry, in case.
Just one last comment on that from me, because there is a lot of pressure, I think, we feel to productize our proposition. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, especially if we can do it smartly. There's some risk, too. Products are made to be commoditized. And once you've developed a product, somebody else is probably going to be able to do it cheaper. A lot of product-based businesses are trying to become service-based propositions. So they actually want to provide a service on a global scale. I think someone, and it's probably unfortunately not from our industry right now, is going to create an Uber of the PR consultancy, communications consultancy, find a way to harness talent that's much more distributed than any of us are right now, and can tap into clients that are not big buyers of services, but much smaller. So I kind of think that's where the next big spike in growth is going to come, and it's probably not going to come from the current independents or the current networks unless we start innovating quickly.
Suggesting that perhaps an algorithm can do your job?
I think an algorithm is already doing a lot of my job.
Okay. All right, I think that's as good a note as any on which to close. Thank you all so much. I'm really glad we made this as interactive
Thank you,
as
Arun.
we did. Thank you.